Welcome to episode 6 of Successful Demo. In each episode, we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one or more newly released cards. In today's video, we'll be looking at the Anarch Breaker, God of War. This is an atrocious Anarch Breaker, and thank goodness, because it's an AI breaker and we know what happens to the game when AI breakers become too good. But seriously, this is so bad, it's basically unplayable. Let's see why. First off, you need virus counters to break ice subroutines. While this doesn't sound bad at first glance, I mean, not having to pay credits to break subs is nice in a world where multi-sub ice is very common. However, if you think about it, this is no different from Darwin, in that it is hard-walled by any corp that has a paid ability window to purge virus counters. In fact, it is actually worse than Darwin. With Darwin, there's at least a plethora of support cards that either raise your breaker strength or lower your opponent's ice strength, such that you can still break the ice, even if the corp purges virus counters. But with God of War, that's not possible. Even if you meet the ice's strength, you can't break subs when you have no virus counters. So, right out of the gate, we are already hard-walled by a semi-common corp hate card in the form of CVS. What else? Well, it has a base strength of 0. This is terrible. Think of all the competitive icebreakers that have seen play in Android Netrunner from day 1 till now. None of them are base 0 strength. Okay, fine, there's Ninja, but that doesn't count. That was like Corset days, and Mimic is better anyway. Base 0 strength is really, really bad in a world, especially in a world where there's lots of high strength ice. That just doesn't float. And to make things worse, to pump strength, it's not trivial either. You need 2 credits to just boost it by just 1 strength. That's a terrible ratio. No one's gonna afford that. This is really, really bad. This is all sorts of bad. I mean, with this ratio, why would you ever play this breaker? And wait, I'm not even done yet. To play this breaker, you still need to take tags. That's right, you're inflicting harm on yourself. You're opening yourself to all sorts of horrible things that the core can do to you. Closing your accounts, trashing your resources, and even killing you with meat damage. With all that said and done, is there any reason to play this God of War? This battle-hungry being is entering battle with a rusty sword and no armor to speak of as he gets boomed away into oblivion. Why play this? Well, since it's a way that it gives you tags, let's look at what other Anarch or neutral cards give you tags. And it turns out there are a few, and what they do is that they actually enable Anarch and neutral cards, some certain Anarch cards to become really powerful. We've seen the clan subtype in this cycle. We have Marsh from Martians and Jarok New Mercs. These could come into play if you get tags from God of War. So that's nice. There's also Data Leak Reversal, which is a pretty good synergy. However, when you think about it, God of War isn't actually really that good in a Data Leak Reversal deck. You don't really need extra meat damage protection, in the sense that in most games, racking up extra tags with God of War is not going to really help your Data Leak plan. You really only need the first tag to get Data Leak going. Also, in such a deck, Joshua B is just by far a much better tag disher, because the corp cannot afford to trash it, and it actually gives you a lot more useful stuff. It gives you a whole click, which is very powerful in a DLR deck. Finally, even if you're using Mars for Martians in such a deck, when you're busy mashing your win button and building the corp, there's really no need for all the extra money. So your deck won't really synergize with itself if you're playing DLR with God of War. What we are really, really going to look at is counter surveillance with Obolus. This is basically the only combo in the card pool you can play with now that really appreciates the extra tags given by God of War. Because both Obolus and counter surveillance scale with the number of tags you have. Which brings us to an interesting question. What sort of Anarch or neutral cards give us tags? So let's have a look at that. We have Joshua B, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a good DLR synergizer, but not that good in a counter surveillance deck, because if you're not running DLR, you're probably not running resource protection, such as Wireless Net Pavilion and Fall Guy. Your Joshua B won't last very long. Same thing with John Masnori. In fact, John Masnori is worse, because you need to actually spend clicks making unsuccessful runs to get tags. Vamp is a way to get tags, that's good, but it only gives you 1 tag at a time. and it requires you to actually draw and play the vamp. So God of War is really the only permanent tag giving device that Anarch and Neutral in either the Anarch faction or Neutral. So that's pretty good, and that's a very good starting point if you want to build a counter surveillance Obelisk deck. I know I do. So let's get down to counter surveillancing. For those of you who are not very familiar with this card, I've talked about it quite a bit, but I haven't actually explained what this card does. This is a card that it's a resource, however, it's basically an event, because what it does is that you can trash it and pay a click to make a run and access the number of cards equal to the number of tags you have. So finally, we actually have something that enables counter surveillance very nicely. I haven't actually played with this card yet because I found it very difficult to reliably tag myself before getting the counter surveillance in, and I also found it very difficult to get enough credits to actually activate counter surveillance. You need X credits to fire off counter surveillance, where X is the number of tags you have. You cannot pay fewer than X credits to access fewer cards. So because of this, Mask for Martians is a very good synergy card and will come into play in the deck that we're about to see. This requires a bit of explaining, so bear with me here. So obviously we see the Obelisk and counter surveillance over here. These are the main cards that are going to actually help us a lot. Obelisk is our meat damage protection and draw engine all roll into one. It's very powerful when you fire it off with a counter surveillance. It will draw you lots and lots of cards, and hopefully if it doesn't win you the game, it will give you enough momentum to win you the game later. Mask for Martians is good money, but it's not enough. This powers your big run, that one turn where you're going to go for a counter surveillance, but otherwise you need some form of reliable economy, and that's where the Magnum Opus comes in. We do need Magnum Opus because we are going tag me from turn 1. We are going to install God of War immediately and start chalking up tags so that by the time we draw a counter surveillance, we are able to access a lot of cards. Because of this, we need reliable economy, and since we can't play resources due to being tagged, we need Magnum Opus. Then we have a couple of solutions for asset spam in Hacktivist, Rumor Mill to deal with certain cards like Stell Moon and Jackson, and Levy because it's a max deck. Speaking of max is a very nice thing to synergize with Obelisk, because you're going tag me from turn 1, Obelisk is going to be active from turn 1. This means that your max hand size is just going to keep going up and up as the game continues. So the max draw will always be nice, as you never have to discard to extra hand size. Vam is a very good card that synergizes well with the tag plan and with the Magnum Opus that we're already playing, because this helps keep the court poor. And it's especially useful in the non-asset spam matchups because they can't really duck your vamp, and keeping them poor means that you have more time to get more tags and get more accesses. Finally, a bit more kill protection in Plascrete, and I've had worse for kill protection and draw. We have Frantic Coding for reliability, a lot of recursion because we are max. This goes without saying. We want to have access to cards reliably, and then we ask ourselves, what sort of Breaker Suite are we playing? We do know that God of War is incredibly inefficient, and we can't use it to break most ice. So for the higher strength ice, I propose using Fem as a way to get past them permanently. David is equally suitable. In fact, David and God of War is just about as nice a synergy as David with Faust, and we know how powerful that was. My problem with David is that it's not permanent, so you realistically cannot use one David to break one big ice, with the ice being nowadays being so being multi-sub, whereas Fem is more permanent. Running David would require you to run more cutlery, but in this case with Fem we can afford to run fewer cutlery, and retrieval run to recur the Fem. And finally, a bit of cutlery, a bit of parasite, a bit of ice destruction here and there to cover the cases where we can't Fem every single piece of ice. So that's our Breaker Suite. Mostly God of War with Fem and some ice destruction with recursion, and Paperclip to deal with cheap barriers. The rest of it is up to God of War. Will this God of War pull through for us? We shall see. Before I forget to mention, I got the idea for this max deck from my good friend, Euro's top 4 competitor, Tristan Vondogo. And his deck, in turn, seems to be based on Magnum Max. Because of that, we all know that the one thing we need to see in our opening hand as Magnum Max is Magnum Opus. There's a reason why we run all 3 copies of it. There's a reason why we are Max. There's a reason why we even run frantic coding. We need to find the Magnum Opus as soon as possible. We also want to find God of War. We want to get it down quick. Unfortunately, there's none in my opening hand. Today we're up against a Tenin Institute, and my opponent actually does a very interesting opening of Ice HQ, Ice R&D, and actually Ice Archives, as you're about to see. So this is actually a very, very good opening for me. It's even better than, playing Hedge Fund or taking money or Celeb Gift. I do not want them to go over 8 credits. This is not the time to hit DNA Tracker. In fact, I can now easily place pressure on centrals and make it very difficult for my opponent to continue. Either they res the ice, which puts them down to very low credits here, or if they don't, then I'm getting their ice is useless. I am disabling their ability by running and getting accesses. So my opponent gets the Morceless up, by what cost? I steal House of Knives because they took a mulligan as well, and they're down to 2 credits. I'm more than happy with that. You also notice I played important cards from my hand first, most notably the Sure Gamble. I drew into the second one, but I played my first one so that it won't get sniped by any net damage. This is Jinteki after all. My second turn, I still don't see a Magnum Opus, is in the bin, but I do see a God of War. So, well, that's the next best thing, right? If I can get tags up. Oh, speaking of tags, the Mausolus gave me a tag. That's so cute. That helps with my Obolus, which I now drop. I'm running here to get the 1 draw from Obolus. I hope to be able to get a draw every single turn by running. If my opponent's defenses are flimsy enough, I can actually power up my draw engine by simply getting accesses from centrals, which is really cool. Unfortunately, the Kakugo is going to keep me out. I'll have to find my one-off Parasite or a knife to get past that. So yeah, with a Martians in my hand, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that I want to rack up the tags as quickly as I can. And I was very tempted to actually run HQ here. My opponent's too poor to fire a snare, so running a HQ would mean that I actually gain credit. I'll give my opponent credit. Net damage was the big thing. I didn't want to lose the God of War or the Mask from Martians from my hand, even though taking tags would be nice. So this is why I ran Archives instead, to disable my opponent's Tenin ability. Now, my max draw gives me counter surveillance, so I really, really don't want to be taking net damage. There's so many good cards in my hand, so I think I need to play as many of them as I can. Then I can start running centrals again without worrying about net damage. Which is something I need to worry about, because judging by the agenda I just stole, that House of Knives, this opponent must be going quite heavily on net damage. So yeah, every single card I've seen so far is net damage. Kakuga is net damage. Morceless has net damage on it. House of Knives is net damage. So yeah, I'm a bit worried about how spiky my opponent's deck can be. And yeah, it seems pretty interesting, very different from what you expect from normal Tenin. I conceded 1 advancement token on the Morceless there. That was due to me not running last turn, but hopefully things will change now, because now we've God of War active, and with a bit more economy, I hope to be able to actually make a successful run this turn. Kakugo is only 1 strength, so running R&D is actually a very tempting option here, but instead I'm going for Archives with the threat of forcing an Ice Res here and Retrieval Run for Magnum Opus. I hope to get my economy online with this Retrieval Run. I leave myself with 4 credits so I can break any ice that's 2 strength or lower. If it's higher than 2 strength, I just hope that I can get through, that it doesn't have an end run. Turns out to be a snack, a sneaky snack, which is nice for me. Not only does it drain lots of money from my opponent, but the subroutines don't fire, because I do manage to break it with God of War for just 2 credits. Not too bad. And I do get the Opus out, and I start mashing the Opus. If you've played Magnum Max before, you know that most of the time is spent just hitting the Opus as though it's your win button. And I'll need to hit it very, very hard this game, very often, because God of War is so darn expensive. Now, as you notice, I'm just going to speed up the video from here on out, because I'll be mashing Opus most of the time. My opponent's only on 2 credits after resing the snack, so I felt like this was a very good time to go in for a counter surveillance, even though I'm only on 3 tags, which means only 3 accesses. I would like to get past the outer ice, because it could be a really nasty ice that I can't break very well. So getting an early access here would be good, and not to mention that even though it won't win me the game, at least it'll draw me a bunch of cards, so that's nice. Here you actually notice that the obelisk draw fires before I access the snare. This is actually an implementation bug on Jinteki.net. The cards clearly say that obelisk fires only after the run's complete, whereas that is after you access cards. So I should not actually be drawing cards until I'm done with the access. So that's actually quite important to note. That what you're seeing right here is wrong, but it didn't matter because my opponent didn't have the money to fire off the snare. Another big reason why running while my opponent was poor was a very good choice. Now I'm going to knife the Kakugo here. Again, I wanted to get the knife going before my opponent could afford to rest the outer ice, and thankfully they weren't able to rest the outer ice. You'll notice that I accessed the same celeb gift, even though so I wasn't actually getting any fresh accesses, but the more important thing was to put the Kakugo in the bin because I didn't really want to deal with the extra net damage. Of course, Max doesn't really care about net damage. Who cares, yeah? When you have so many cards, it doesn't really matter, but I realized that I could easily get walled by something like Komainu into Kakugo, so better clear the Kakugo now than later, and of course it's less annoying to get past R&D if there's one less ice in your way. Okay. What do I do here? My opponent Smiley ices HQ, seeing the Vamp in the bin. I actually really wanted to go for a Vamp this turn, but my opponent's too rich. They just played Celebrity Gifts, I think 1 or 2 turns ago. So they are richer than me. I can't really Vamp them yet. So the next best thing I can do here is to actually Retrieval Run for a Fem on the Morcelus. I could wait for the Spoon to turn up, but by the time the Spoon comes up, we have the problem of having to deal with the outer ice as well that is guarding the Morcelus. So instead of trying to spoon the Morcelus, why not just deal with it using Fem instead? So we got the Fem on the board and forced my opponent to override the Res Morcelus. So that's a gain for me. I asked my opponent for actions because I do have Rumor Mill in my hand, and smartly enough, they used the Jackson Howard. Otherwise, I would play the Rumor Mill and trash Jackson promptly. So at this point, it's all about just getting lots of credits so that I can Vamp my opponent. And here I was trying to draw for a bit of recursion as well. I have 1 Deja Vu left in my deck, I think, and that's going to be quite important. I need to spend 1 Deja Vu on Levy, so I need to be really careful with how I run because hitting Komainu at the wrong time now could easily lock me out of the game. Because I did not run on that turn, my opponent actually fast advanced a Brain Trust with Shipment from Tenin. So when piling up Tenin Institute's ability with Shipment from Tenin, there's a lot of reason to run every single turn, which is why I'm running right now with Counter Surveillance. Given the tempo hit that my opponent took to score the Brain Trust, I was able to Counter Survey there, and I drew my entire deck, accessing a bunch of cards. Access a House of Knives there, so that's good. And now that the Counter Surveillance is done with, I can safely levy in an upcoming turn. So that was a pretty good Counter Surveillance, but it didn't really get me very close to winning. I'm actually tied with my opponent, 2 agenda points apiece. But I'm gonna start playing the Mask for Martians from my hand. This should boost me up to a very healthy credit level and allow me to go in for a Counter Surveillance right after the levy. That would be a dream. Click 1 levy, click 2 Counter Surveillance install, click 3 do a Counter Surveillance run, and then draw basically half my deck with Obelisk. That would be so sweet. Let's see if I can do that. But first, in order to set up the counter surveillance run, I need to vamp my opponent to make them poor. Here's where Kakugo comes in really handy. Double Kakugo HQ is such a sweet thing to see when you're on God of War as your main breaker. This way, I only needed to spend 2 credits for each Kakugo and take 2 net damage, which was no issue, given that I such a padded hand. Turns out, the net damage all missed the key cards, both Deja Vus and the Mask from Martians in my hand. Those were very key cards. Now, I saw double Jackson Howard on my counter surveillance run on R&D earlier. So, if my opponent is not going to rest the Jackson, I'm just going to drop the Rumor Mill and then run the Jackson Howard, which they now cannot use. And I know they're going to draw their 3rd Jackson Howard soon. I could have ran R&D to trash the Jackson Howard here. That would be a really smart thing to do, actually, in retrospect. But given that I have Rumor Mill out on the table, and my opponent doesn't have any way to clear it in the foreseeable future, I'm more than happy to let them have the Jackson Howard. It's not going to do much. So here I drop the Parasite, my one-off Parasite, before going in for the Levy. And then I see the Counter Surveillance. Alright, someone's going to go on R&D right now. But I'm missing something. I'm on 10 tags, which means I need to spend 10 credits to fire off the counter surveillance. I don't really have that money. I still need to deal with the R&D ice, which my opponent almost certainly can res here. This is a problem. So I need Mars from Martians before I can actually make a run on R&D safely. With that in mind, I started with a retrieval run. Not sure if this was really necessary, but it was a late game contingency plan in case I couldn't find Mars from Martians. I was going to retrieve the parasite that just dropped off from the first Kakugo. I'm going to attach it to the second Kakugo, and that leaves all the Kakugos in the bin. I'm happy about that, and yeah, you see my opponent's forced to re-ice HQ here, but now they're much richer. They played an IPO, they played hedge fund, they're on 17 credits. And I luckily drew into the Mars from Martians with my max draw. This max draw is really helping me out. Putting important stuff in my bin and drawing me, the passive card draw is really helping me get past all these nasty ice. Now I have so many credits, 22 credits. All I need is 10 credits on access, so I'm more than happy to take the 3 net damage to get the iPad Worst draw. I'm gonna see a whole bunch of cards in my hand. Again, this should not happen. I should not be able to steal these Obocatas and hit the snare safely because I should be drawing with Obelisk only after I'm done with the accesses. In theory, I think this does not change the outcome because I would just have not stolen the Obocatas and then instead, next turn, I would go in for another counter surveillance because I would have drawn basically my entire deck, found another counter surveillance, I would have gone in, and this time I would actually have enough cards in hand to tank the snare and steal the Obocatas. So it's still important to know the proper rules and how the cards interact. I should not have been able to win on that turn, but I had a pretty good chance to win the entire game nonetheless. Chance of winning aside, however, I did not feel like this was a very convincing deck. I just happened to have had a good matchup because my opponent was playing lots of low strength ice, which God of War deals with very easily. My opponent did not have the ice that would completely ruin me in Komainu. That is the one ice you don't want to see when you're playing against Obelisk. When you're playing Obelisk yourself. And finally, my opponent wasn't playing something like Acid Spam or Tag Punishment. Things that would really give me a lot of trouble when I amass lots of tags and spend time hitting Magnum Opus. So all in all, I just think that it's way too expensive and it's something that you cannot keep up against a more competitive corp that will try to drain your resources. In fact, I don't think you can get too many accesses of counter surveillance if you are forced to bleed money dealing with the corp's tempo. Now, y'all might have a very good question. Hey, you're trying to amass lots of tags, right? You're trying to get lots of money, aren't you? Isn't there a blue card that allows you to do that? Very, very well. And you like that card, don't you? Well, I kind of do. And yes, that was actually where I first started with when I tried to build a God of War deck. But I just couldn't make it work. Someone else has, however. If you are the kind of person that loves amassing tags and making God of War work, be sure to check out this deck that I found on Netrunner DB. You can go search it up yourself. Seems pretty solid. But again, I think with all the limitations of God of War that I mentioned earlier, I think it's just, it's just not good enough to be on par with the competitive decks of today. Well, that's goodbye from me. Happy net running. I'll see you next time. Welcome to episode 6. Welcome to episode 6 of Success. I can't say that word for nuts.